So from time to time anyway, I decide to answer questions this way and comments this way because it just makes sense. And for what I've termed the Anglo-Sino War, this does make sense. So I'm going to start off with the questions from the live, and then I'm going to go to the questions from the long patrol. One of the questions I'm first going to explain is why I call it the Anglo-Sino War. And if you're going, this should be the Anglo-Japanese War. Well, I have a reason. And it starts back with the Napoleonic Wars, which are not called Anglo-French Wars Round 2. They're called the Napoleonic Wars, and various other names given to them, including the War of Jenkins' Ear, which, if that's trying to explain, this is not a war we're having against a particular nation, there's nothing else trying to. But anyway, I know Sino is traditionally today attached with China and war's relationship with China, but the interwar period is also sometimes shorthand for wars with the whole of Asia. And in this conflict, this is just some of the Japanese states which possibly would get involved. Well, Japanese-controlled states. Manchuria, Xinjiang, provincial government of the Republic of China, the reformed government of the Republic of China, and of China, which were both things at the same time. Believe it or not, they governed different territories. And Chosun, of course, or Korea, as it's called today. Most of the fighting would probably take place in China to establish bases, etc. It might also take place in the Philippines if the Japanese manage to get a scratch force together to try and attack the Philippines. And so it seemed to me likely that would be the phrase chosen because of the wider scenario. I know we tend to focus in just on major powers, but that is the reason why it's called World Wars 1 and 2, not the Anglo-German War. You sometimes have to come up with a name which encompasses all the partners, even if not all partners are created equal. I should skip this because by the time this goes live tomorrow, that will no longer work. But thank you everyone for all your donations. Thank you for your kindness and thank you for your support for the Hyder trip. The super chats keep coming keep coming in. The patron subscribers, the channel subscribers, just you're amazing. And the sheer amount, the fact that this surpassed its goal of £3,600 is just thank you. So let's get into the questions. And I'm doing this in terms of first come, first answered. Hopefully it works. Glenn McClevery. I'm recalling that the HMS New Zealand was brought on loans as a part of a larger national development program, and they originally offered 2 battleships. Assuming we could skip the Great Depression, which we can't reasonably, and New Zealand declared they wanted to help fund a modern carrier of the British Empire to help police global trade and get another score over the Australians. What exactly might be built in the late 1930s, and might such a vessel have replaced an older ship or joined as an independent vessel? It's possible Australia and even India or Canada might have all had a go. Would an extra 4 carriers change the conflict in meaningful manner? Or would they be fitted away piecemeal before the British realised how useful carriers were? Okay, well, Glenn, the British did realise how useful carriers were. The trouble was they only had fleet carriers, and they had a lot of jobs they wanted to do with carriers. Which is why you have a carrier doing anti-submarine warfare operations when it's a fleet carrier, when actually you shouldn't. And then later in war, you have doing the exact same thing, lots of escort carriers doing that role, going out as part of anti-submarine warfare hunting groups, and doing it great. So the problem wasn't that they didn't know how useful the carriers were, it's just that they had a one-size-fits-all solution for the carriers. It's legacy of treaty twaddle, honestly it is. But 4 carriers, well, it depends when they're ordered. Now, if they're ordered at the same time as Ark Royal, then they'd have to replace other carriers. They'd have to replace their older carriers with them, which would create issues. Could be done, but they would have to replace a lot of older carriers with them. So basically, Hermes, Argus, the lot would have to go. However, you said late 1930s, and that gives an option, because if we say it's at the same time as the Illustrious class are ordered, and it's after the Japanese have broken away from the treaty system, the British go, well, we don't want to bust anyone's things with massive battleship construction or anything like that, but we're going to up our carrier production for trade protection reasons. And we're doing this by our colonies matching our buy of Illustrious class, because we're ordering 4 of those. It wouldn't be unusual for that to happen. Now, that gives you a very interesting scenario, because instead of Illustrious entering service on his own, then there being a gap, it'll be each pair of carriers entering service. Now, if we do that, well, for starters, it means you start building up the fleet air arm from 1937, because you've got this carrier surge coming in. So you start building up more personnel. And in let's say 1940, before you lose Ark Royal, before you lose some of these ships, you will have had about 4 carriers rather than 2 carriers going through, and that's going to increase your number of personnel by a significant depth in terms of numbers of capability, which could then have consequential options for, probably not for Glorious or Courageous. Unfortunately, they still get probably used the same way, because there aren't that many carriers to go around. And in the case of Glorious, probably still ends up with the same captain in command. Might not, strange enough, but probably does. So could end up with the same scenario. But what does it have an impact on? Well, it means that probably you have Taranto carried out by HMS Illustrious and HMS Tobruk. Probably the Australians get it first. I'm sorry. They're going to be the easiest to push, and they've got the largest. They're largest of any of the Commonwealth navies to build upon. Vikrant would probably be number 4, and that's what I've named the Indian one. That would be the most interesting to see put in place, but could actually be done. I wouldn't be surprised if HMS New Zealand and Victorious end up becoming USS Kiwi and USS Robin, deploying a pair of carriers, which could have an interesting impact on the Pacific operations, because it would mean that instead of being down to 2 carriers, the Allied forces would be down to 3 carriers. Especially well, actually they might stay there for longer, especially as HMCS Bonaventure could cover the Atlantic. It would also be interesting in that Vikrant and Tobruk would most likely be in the Indian Ocean in 1942 to deal with the potential Japanese. So you could end up with 2 Illustrious class style armored carriers with 4C. So it could be Prince of Wales, Repulse, and Vikrant and Tobruk, with Tobruk being a veteran carrier by this point, having served the Mediterranean, and Vikrant being a new carrier. There's also the fact that if you have Tobruk and Illustrious at Taranto, you've doubled the number of aircraft going in for a strike. So that's going to have a consequential knock-on effect on the Italian operations in the Mediterranean, which is going to affect how they operate, which is going to affect the need of carriers and fleet forces in the Mediterranean, which is going to have effect on the forces which are out there with Prince of Wales. As said, there's also the fact that if you have more officers going through damage control for carriers, you have a larger pool to draw from. That means you're less likely to have officers with absolutely no real understanding of how you do damage control in an aircraft carrier, i.e. the book you follow, which it does involve counterflooding. So that in Ark Royal, which might mean that Ark Royal doesn't get sunk by that torpedo. Remember, it's the taking the time to do the counterflooding which really sinks Ark Royal, not the torpedo. That does damage, but that's repairable. So there are lots of options once you have extra carriers. Interesting question. let's see. Strider, you have lots of lovely comments, but you haven't got an actual question. Although one, for some reason on the stream, you seem to be talking like you're speaking to an actual class. Not only that, but one that's not listening whatsoever. Yeah, I do slip into teacher mode. It's what you find yourself doing it sometimes. Nick Vorden, hello. Thanks for the good video, thank you. I think your analysis of what Germany would do has one flaw. If Poland or the USSR aren't built into the alliance in 1939, well, considering the USSR is already at war with Japan in 1939, they might well build themselves into the alliance. What I think is unlikely, USSR probably, as said. Poland is a different matter. Why should Germany not go in August or September 1939 to attack Poland, especially if the Allied armies are in the war on the other side of the globe? Well, the armies might not be there; it might be more of navies, but also there's the fact that if the Allies are a united front, it's going to sound strange. In the Spanish Civil War, yes, the Germans were interfering and the Italians were interfering, but they also were very keen on being seen to be part of the Allied operation. It was important for them to be high status and valuable units. So the thing is, I don't think they can really sustain the kind of forces they would need to be sustaining to be able to claim they have they have something on the table worthwhile and carry out Poland, because let's be honest, German logistics was freaking terrible. It also gives Hitler and Mussolini glory, which means while they're getting glory from those operations, they maybe don't need to go hunting for other glory at that particular time. I'm not 100% sure, but as said, the Soviet Union's already involved in 1939 fighting Japan. So if Britain's suddenly fighting Japan in 1939, the enemy of my enemy is my friend starts to spring to mind, and it's what the British applied in World War II. I mean, some islands in the Pacific are certainly nice, but the relationship between Germany and Poland is like the relationship between Imperial Germany and France over Alsace-Lorraine. I don't know how it was for the USSR, but I don't see Stalin saying no to more territory. Well, Stalin would like more territory in the east. Especially when you consider the economic centers and population centers and where people can actually live in Russia, you want to move south in the east. So if Germany joined such an alliance with the UK and US, why shouldn't they ask for Danzig? So basically a land bridge to East Prussia, for example, or for anything. What was Germany built before 1914? Since the Soviets aren't integrated into the US-UK-French alliance, as said, they would be, because they'd be fighting the Japanese. They're already fighting the Japanese, and yeah, be an easy way to support things. I can understand where you're thinking coming from, but as said, Soviet Union is already at war with Japan. They would join in. Poland is the one which would be in trouble, but Poland's trick would be if they join the alliance as well. That's the thing. If Poland sends some destroyers, then suddenly it becomes the plucky Polish destroyers in the US press, and yeah. There are issues. It'll be political. Let's go through one. What if Mitsumasa Yonai got his way and the Yamato class was cancelled? Then what effect does it have? Cruisers, probably a pair of smaller battleships. I'm talking 45 to 50,000 ton ships are built. Possibly some carriers. Let's put it this way: lots of things which were historically left unfinished would probably manage to get finished. Does it have a massive effect on the Japanese order of battle versus the Americans? No. Does it perhaps provide them some more depth of resources and some more capabilities? Potentially. If you think about it, if you have those carriers, those ships not built, and the industrial capacity is turned and said to the other ships, you could have 2, 3 more carriers in the Kido Butai when they attack Pearl Harbor. If you have 2 to 3 more carriers plus some fast battleships in the Kido Butai when they attack Pearl Harbor, then perhaps they, I don't know, as well as the Congos, perhaps they launch more aircraft into the strikes and probably do more damage. Maybe even take out those oil supplies, but also maybe they get close enough to bombard. Maybe they do a dash in and bombard. That's the point. If you have them, and also if you have enough carriers, perhaps you keep 2 fully loaded for anti-ship strikes, just in case you spot the enemy carriers at sea, and the rest do the strikes on the things ashore. There are options with more ships. I think at least one carrier. The maths could work out as 2 of their lighter carrier designs get built as well. So fast enough to keep up the Kido Butai, but not going to take up as much effort. Other than keeping HMS Hood as the largest ship in the world, the question carries on. Well, by tonnage and length, right up to being sunk until USS Essex beats it in 1942 on length, and Bismarck's sister Tirpitz beats it on tonnage. Historically, Yamato beat Hood in both tonnage and length, as Hood was 42,462 tons at the standard and 48,360 tons at full before our demise. How was Pride of the Royal Navy defined? Tonnage or length? Interesting question. Biggest. As long as there's a category where it's the biggest, and they're proud. Yeah, Knights of Run. The Yamato class were nothing more than an Avanti ego trip to a project that was intended to make the IJN feel less insecure and inadequate. Potentially, but they could have also been a massive deterrent if they'd been used right. I mean, if the Japanese had announced when they had them available and they had launched them and commissioned and sort of got them ready, commissioned them and they were ready, announced them around the world with big flash bulbs and gone around the world and massive advertisement of we've got these new battleships at 18-inch guns, it would have terrorized people. Would it have forced the Americans to withdraw their fleet from Pearl Harbor is an interesting question. It's up to you to figure that one out. I think there are certainly a fair number of, maybe not admirals, but a lot of American politicians who'd be very uneasy about their fleet being so forward when not enough of their fleet had 16-inch guns at that point. Taking on an 18-inch gun battleship with 14-inch guns, well, sposs, you and I might not worry if Admiral Ching Lee's in charge. The rest of the US politicians might. So, yeah, and it would have caused a massive building race in the UK and America as a response. You would probably have seen the British churn out battleships. Probably some sort of line would get finished by 1943. It would have at least had 16-inch guns. They might have drugged a design out from somewhere else, an earlier design, and polished it up and upgraded it. I don't know. So it might have ended up having 18-inch guns. But if something would have got built, and that's an interesting, a whole different other ball game, because if you have not just Vanguard, but a couple of brand new battleships, fast battleships in the Royal Navy after the end of World War II, the odds of one of them surviving for longer goes up higher, because they're not a one-off white elephant capability, they're an actual sustainable capability. Kind of like the 4 hours. And it becomes a USP to have them. It's an interesting question. Not a Wolf. Interesting. Also, there's the fact that what would and also we are thinking about this in terms of the reaction of the Allies, of course. There's also the reaction of Nazi Germany and Japan and Italy. I mean, not Japan, Italy when it's announced, if it's announced, and even Soviet Union. And there's one thing after the war's over and wars being fought, but if before the Japanese even declared war, they're announcing they've got 18-inch battleships, everyone's going to wonder what they've got hidden in reserve. The Japanese are considered inscrutable, very secretive people. So if they're publicly admitting they have something that powerful, imagine what's sitting off in the quiet of the wings. We could have started a whole new battleship building race. Not a wolf. Interesting. With the Admiral discussion, it sounds like they knew the faults but ignored them, even quite a bit before World War II. And that's what it was shortly in the run up to it. I'm both sad they weren't listened to and glad considering what happened. Welcome to my world. There are a lot of interesting things which go on there, and Japan does not have dumb admirals. They know what they're facing. I honestly think even the ones who were arguing for war didn't think they were going to win. And that's a problem. That is really a problem. If they say elections sometimes are won and lost on 1 square foot of real estate, and that's in the mind of the candidate. I would say they are won or lost in the heart of the candidate. But I would also say that if you go into an election or go into a war or go into any contest expecting to lose, guess what? You're not going to win. If you expect to lose, you're not going to win. If you expect to lose, you're not going to win. You're just not. And that's the live question comments. That's because people get to chat away in the live, isn't it? It's always less comments on a live than there are on a long patrol. Ooh, the long patrol has lost them. Okay. Martin Peacock. Hello, Martin. I do know you've done a whole load of UAD questions on UAD stuff about the 18-inch Agincourt, and I think you're going to require a specific video response from me because they are quite that massive. So I'll just add that in now. Martin Peacock. The points about Japan being happy with a higher limit answered something that has puzzled me for a while now. I read that Japan was the instigator for Britain being allowed to build 2 more ships. Japan actually suggested that they be 2 of the G3s under construction. That always seemed a bit odd to me, but I kind of accepted it as the rest of the article, I think anyway, it was a while ago, was so well sourced. And that makes more sense, as it kind of makes the 35-ton limit null and void, and it needs to be looked at. It was also mentioned in the same article that Japan would have accepted 38,500 tons. I think in reality, everyone would have been far happier with a lot more weight. I am currently doing some stats, and I'm going to produce a video which is going to be about, what I think an equitable Washington Treaty would have been. The reason I'm doing that is to lay the grounds for a video which I'm going to come up with debating whether it's the Washington Treaty or the Treaty of Versailles, which really lay the groundwork for what happened for World War II. And my argument is always that the Treaty of Versailles ensures Germany gets upset, but the Washington Treaty is what ensures that you have Japan and to an extent Italy also involved. So they're what would have been a war with Germany into a world war. But I'm going to make that case at some point in the future. That's going to be a long patrol. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that I can't do that unless I have a video already up explaining what I think an equitable and fair Washington Naval Treaty would have been. And one of the first things I do is go, right then, what are you all building at? Oh, everyone's building roughly 40,000-ton ships. So you all know roughly what a quality warship or a battleship of this time equals. So we'll set the limit at 40,000 tons. That's fair. Set the limit at 40,000 tons. You know it. Everyone knows it. Everyone in that room from the navies knew that their designs were in the order of 40+ thousand tons to be a good, decent warship, decent battleship. Something which was qualitative enough to be fair to their crews. And this is my big problem with the Washington Naval Treaty. I think it's a letdown of the crews. Because if you know you can't build a viable, capable battleship on that tonnage, that is going to be capable all round, that you're going to have to end up focusing in, so it's going to have to either be slow, or it's going to have to be an armored canoe with paper walls, then you are doing your crews a disservice. Now, you can say, well, they can all go the Nelson Rodney route of sacrificing speed, but you can't. You can't all go that route. You can't. It's just so I think that the limit should have been roughly 40,000 tons. And I've got spreadsheets and I'm working it all out and I'm going to go through and I'm going to explain my logic and my thinking and the ratios I come up with for various things. I'm starting off with the capital ships and then I'm going to include some ratios for cruisers and carriers and things to work it all out. So it should be fun. Andrew Cox, of course you can trust dockyard workers. That's one of the reasons why NATO used to have so many photos of the details of Russian subs. Andrew Cox, given what Britain stands to gain if it defeats Japan, and given how slow the US battle fleet is, would Britain want the US as an ally, and could they prevent the US getting involved? The answer is they couldn't really prevent them getting involved, because America would probably just declare war and go, we ally with Britain to fight these evil Japanese. In which case you can't really go, no, it's our war, not yours, because how are you going to keep them out? Declare war on them to stop them getting involved in your war? That's just moronic. You're not going to do it. Can you just imagine someone doing it? No! You can't declare war on the people we're fighting and say you're going to ally us. We don't want you, so we're going to declare war on you to stop you getting involved in our war with them. Just... No, it's not. Politically, that's not either useful though. Plus, it's more than the battle fleet. Because there are US bases, etc. And also, if you have the US battle fleet, well, you can use the US battle fleet as your... It's going to sound terrible. You can put your slow ships with the US battle fleet. And so your fast ships can act as your fast wing. But the slow battle fleet becomes this sort of mobile Armageddon coming up. Dun, 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 dun. And, the whole time it's getting closer and closer and closer. And the Japanese just can't deal with that. And besides, you probably stick everyone else you can in that as well. But the fast battle fleet could well involve things like the Scharnhorsts, the Dunkirks, the Queen Elizabeth classes, which have been upgraded, the Royal Navy's battle cruisers. That would be probably the fast fleet, with some fast carriers to keep up them. So probably Ark Royal and one of the Yorktown. Cool fleet. Andrew Cooks, how do the Japanese employ ambush until the iron has got north of the Philippines, especially if Hong Kong holds out and can host long-range recon as well? You could almost imagine Malta-style convoys and resupply missions to keep Hong Kong in the fight. Potentially, but it's probably going to be submarine ambushes. It's submarines. Andrew Cox, if Russia joined the British, would the RN use Petrovsk or Vladivostok? Potentially, but they'd have to bring everything with them, so possibly they'd give it to the Americans instead. Andrew Cox then points out, well, how much would be left in Weihai Wei had been lost and then retaken both sides, blowing up as much as possible before they left? Russia, just thinking the Russian bases may be more intact, even if only with Russian equipment. This is an interesting one. I'm going to get collaborating on this point. Weihai Wei doesn't have much there in the first place, and one of the reasons why the British had so much invested in portable docks as war was they knew for wartime operations they would have to take it all with them. Same is pretty much true for Vladivostok. There isn't much there at this point. But there's a lot of there on paper in terms of we plan to have this there. It's not there in reality at this point. So basically, the British would hand over to the Americans and go, yeah, if you want anything, you got to take it with you. The Americans would have to build their own floating dry docks and everything else and take it with them, which is why the British would let them have that, and the British would have Weihai Wei, and that's another use for an ally. And also, it means the Americans have to deal with their people getting exposed to communism rather than the British having to deal with theirs getting exposed to communism, which they have enough fun with in World War II. Andrew Cox, what would the British politically aim in a war with Japan? At what point would they consider accepting peace with Japan? In World War II, thanks to the Americans, it was unconditional surrender, but in the case of one incident with one cruiser, how great would the concession the Britain wants? My theory is Britain would probably want Japan reducing naval strength to that of France and Italy. I have a point for this. And withdraw from all territory and lands acquired after 1919. They would be forfeited to international protectorates or returned to China. And Britain would want them reduced, but not so much that the US was able to ignore them. They wouldn't want Japan turned into a vassal of the United States. Same level of France, Germany, and Italy. Italy, and France and Italy, basically. Maybe to an extent Germany. The British might well have a treaty which goes through, which allows Germany to build up to the same level as France as well at the same time, and they let Japan do it. And that's fine, because then France, Germany, all four of them together outnumber the British or the Americans, but it would take at least three of them to equal the British or Americans if they're added up together. Right. Nakano Productions. So, one of the takeaways from this that the Japanese high command mentality got into World War II was one of, we won't win and we will get roughed up, but if we rough them up enough, we can hopefully bring them to negotiate table and gain a continued existence as opposed to fading in obscurity. I'm reading it right? Sadly enough, yes, that is their best hoped for outcome. Could you build and commission enough unicorns in time to help in this war? Pretty much. Just go by the speed at which the British built light fleet carriers, they could probably get a few out in time, as they're already building unicorn. I know in this scenario Britain will be fighting from bases, but given just how ferocious and how successful the Imperial Japanese Army was in real life, I can't see this being an easy war. Now, granted, as you mentioned, in real life, the Imperial Japanese Army and Imperial Japanese Navy went up against forces that weren't best, unlike those in this scenario. So there's that. But even with the crack Allied troops going out, I imagine the IJ and IJA, whose mentality, even amongst conscripts, was one of death before dishonor. I can't see our guys having an easy time. No. But there's also the fact that where they're starting from a lot further back without warning. You could argue the USN did this in real life anyway, but would you envisage the RM blockading Japan much like it did Germany in World War I? Certainly, and I think you would find it kind of interesting because the blockade, the T-class would shift from being you're not getting into the South China Sea, for their Japanese service ships while Singapore's being built up, etc., to being we're blockading Japan. And that's definitely what the T-class, and to an extent the S-class, would be covering. Then there would be cruisers as the level beyond that, and a battle group sitting further back if a large fleet came to sea. It would be a sort of distant blockade, rather than a really close blockade. Although the submarines would be very close, and if any attractive target did happen to go past them, they'd probably muller it. Last question. You obviously can't predict or write up battles for a war that never happened, but how much territory do you think Japan will be able to contour in this scenario before or even after the British Allies turn up? Also, in this event, they are not prepared for war. If anything, they've been caught on the back foot. So landings even half scale those to 741 are probably pretty much impossible, right? Can they make incursions at Celebes and Banda Sea without taking the Philippines? Could they wind up taking Borneo? No. Philippines. Philippines is it, because they've got to get past the Philippines to get anywhere else. And they're already started from that far back, and you've got reinforcements coming already from the British. And remember, the thing is, reinforcements don't have to be that many to make your life a lot of trouble. And they don't have to fight ashore. They can come straight ashore to logistics. They will find food, everything there when they come ashore because they're reinforcements. Whereas you have to take everything with you, which means it takes a lot longer to organize you than it does them. Right. 20th July 1944. It'll be the Anglo-Japanese War of February 1939, Doctor. Right then. I did explain this at the beginning, but I'm going to read out my answer again. Okay, not in 1939 language. Thanks to the February prick-up, Star Trek unspotted it. Joys of dyslexia, but also occasionally, I just miss it. All people miss it anyway. Dyslexics just miss it more often. In 1939, language Sino would often be used, as I said earlier, to mean Eastern or Oriental, and as this would involve a lot of Chinese territory, thus involvement of Japanese popular states, I felt Sino would be the period accurate term. But I changed the titles back to the Anglo-Japanese War on the videos because, as I've said in this response, I do see yours 20th July 1944 points and other points. I should have used modern terminology for titles to avoid confusion. trouble is for me is I tend to research, write, and then title presentations. So when I'm writing a title and choosing a title, I'm thinking in terms of the 1920s and 1930s. That's where my brain is at. Which is also why occasionally I find Old English seeps into some of my Napoleonic War stuff, which is fun. John South, personally, in this situation, I think the European war wouldn't be between the Western Allies fighting Germany and Italy, but in Eastern Europe with Stalin attacking Hitler in 1942. Potentially. Although he'd have to get through Poland, but it depends what's happened to Poland this time. As for Japan attacking the Philippines in 1939, that's not an option. It was only the capture of southern Chinese bases and French Indochina in 1940 that gave Japanese the launching off points to attempt an invasion of Southeast Asia. You say this, but Japan has divisions at various points that they have available. They have high mobility divisions. It's one of the things the British worry about in late 1930s is the Japanese do have high mobility divisions in Japan, but they don't worry about them that much because I think they've got to come to Philippines first. So they have 4 divisions based mainly in the South Island area, which they consider their reaction divisions, and they're still part of the British estimates in 1938. So I'm presuming they're still around in January 1939. So that's what I think ends up hitting the Philippines, probably 2 of those divisions. That's a tremendously long. I don't give them much chance of success because that's a tremendously long logistics trail, and that's going to be a nightmare to support a supply. But in 1940, that gave the Japanese launching off points in invasion of Southeast Asia. It's also likely that the Soviets invade Manchuria during the war, as they were already Soviet-Japanese border tension, and fighting was actually going on in 1939. As the Japanese defended at Kolongal, as they had already come to blows in 1939 at Lake Khasan, and the Soviets were actively supporting Chiang Kai-shek at this point. Plus, they would want revenge for the Russo-Japanese War. Yes, I'm fairly sure the Russians get involved. Let's say everyone, what could the USN, IJN, Marine Nationale, Regional Marine, and Royal Navy get in the Washington Treaty was 41,000 tons to account for HMS Hood and a 10-10-7 ratio for the USN, RN, IJN? And this gets interesting because you have to remember the original ratio is 5-5-3 1.75. So 5 for Britain and 5 for America, 3 for Japan, 1.75 for France, and 1.75 for Italy. So it's been kind of interesting to work out what happens if you do increase it up. So saying 10-10, okay. The Britain and America wanted an advantage of 6 at least ships over Japan. That seems to come into it. It's one of the reasons why they have the ratio they do, because that gives the Japanese 9 ships to the British and American 15 ships under those treaties, which is a 6 superiority. So, what happens when you start making it 10-10-7? Well, you then have to work out what the others are going to be. And the ratio I've come up with as being equitable, and I'll be talking about this more in my video, which probably will come out next Monday. Odds are. There's a UAD video I've got planned for Friday this week. That's the 25th. So, and I haven't yet got a video scheduled for Monday next week. So that will possibly be that one. The equitable Washington and Washington Naval Treaty. And I've gone 10-10-7-4 because that just works out. So 10-10-7-4-4. Interestingly enough, that does give both Italy and France 8 ships. They're quite happy with. It gives Japan 14 ships, and it gives Britain and America 20 ships. Now, if you're dealing at roughly 41,000 tons per ship, well, that's 820,000 tons of battleships for the British and Americans. For the Japanese, that's a lot of ships. No, that's 560, 570. See, 574,000 tons. And for both Italy and France, that would be 328,000 tons of battleships, which is a reasonable amount. You've got down, that's basing it on a 41,000 ton limit. I'm just going, look, 41,000 ton standard displacement is it. I think that works. I think, you see, the trouble is it's keeping it fair, but also getting to the goal that people wanted, and people wanted didn't want a naval race. And I think the trouble that comes with the Washington Naval Treaty, and I'll be explaining this more in the video about it, is that they pushed too far to try and avoid a naval race. They want to stop all naval construction. I think it would be more sensible to instead heavily reduce naval construction. If you limit the number of construction but allow construction, then people at least have construction to focus on. The trouble is with the treaty as it is, nations go away feeling robbed. Nations go away and have to build ships, if they stick to the rules, which they know aren't as good as they could be. Nations have to go away and make tough decisions, and politicians and admirals do not like making those kinds of tough decisions. It tends to lead to griping. So my basic thesis is this. If you're going for a peace treaty, and you should always go for a peace treaty, you can. If you're going for an arms limitation treaty, you always should. There is a reason why the START treaties worked. Because whilst they placed limits on things, they did not stop it all. They allowed limited evolution and development. And in this scenario, in the scenario we're looking at, France and Italy both get new construction early. Japan has everything cut down. Britain is sort of not too worried because they're presuming their infrastructure is going. They're going to find a way to keep their infrastructure going. Don't realize the great big collapses are coming up, which are going to destroy undermine their infrastructure massively, and that governments aren't going to invest in the infrastructure. So, because they have nothing new coming in through to demand that infrastructure, and the Americans, well, whilst the politicians don't want to build, the Navy understands what the kind of ships they've got. And the thing is, if you know, and one of the parts of Washington Treaty is you know when the replacements are going to be allowed, when you're going to be allowed to replace ships. And if you are given enough of headroom in terms of that tonnage limitation, and getting rid of older ships, that you can build new ships until you get to that point at a slow rate, well, that keeps your infrastructure and industry going. That allows you to improve things. It also means you can look your sailors in the eye and tell them you are giving them something which is viable. And I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for responding to these videos, and thank you for paying the attention to them, and thank you for all the support there's been. What have we got coming up? That's helpful. Let's see. Well, Pathfinder class is already out. They came out. That was recorded today and went out today. Final version now. But A la Argentina is next week. And in terms of lives we have coming up, we have on Thursday, we have from Vasawa, Admiral Kimmel. What did he do? As the US Pacific Fleet Commander, to ready it for war. Basically exercised it infinitum, but we'll carry on to that one. And next week we have 1939 Destroyer Doctrine of the combatant navies, and where did it come from? It's going to be fun, looking at the various different navies. Brewship 74 on 27th March is going to be full of books, including this one, which arrived yesterday, but I only managed to open it today because someone put it in their pile of papers rather than my pile of papers. My sister. She's trying to make my books now. Terrible. Anyway, it is Capable Beyond Our Dreams, the Australia's Bathurst class corvettes, 1949-60 by John Henshaw, and it's produced by the Sea Power Centre. Really cool. Lots of plans, lots of designs, lots of stuff in here. This is going to be fun. Always do like a nice dynamics design. Anyway, that one's going to be discussed on Sunday. So take care. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed. Have fun. Ba-da-da-da-da, Year of the Cruiser. Bye. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.